Good afternoon. It's my pleasure today to introduce a good friend, one of the new funds here in town, just about going on a year old, maybe a little over a year now, right, Tatiana? I think that's about right.
Yes, we formed about a year ago.
Yeah. And I wanted to have one of the GPs in this new fund, Steamwork Ventures, come on, and Tatiana drew the short straw. Actually, she was my first choice, and I'm so thrilled that she was able to say yes and join us today. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to Tatiana Mulry from Steamwork Ventures.
Really nice to see everybody. Thanks for the invite, Len. And if the partners were all straws, I would definitely be the short one. I have two quite tall partners.
Absolutely. So Tatiana, tell us a little bit about yourself prior to getting into Steamwork Ventures and then we'll talk about the path that led you there.
Sure. I mean, it's always interesting to know where to start the story. I went to school in New York City, having been a quite poor scholarship student, and then jumping into investment banking was a very interesting jump. Jumping from being a full scholarship student at NYU into investment banking was a big culture shock for me, for sure. It was a really interesting new world that I had no idea even existed when I got into that business. I was a healthcare research associate for a couple firms there in New York City, and it was really a very interesting experience, really got me grounded in analyzing businesses, figuring out the fundamentals, doing financial modeling, writing about them, speaking about them. What should we buy, sell, and hold on Wall Street for public firms? Then I went to MasterCard for 10 years, and I was in a variety of roles, from franchise management, which is like setting the rules and standards and compliance for a big global company. I did a lot of product development, worked with our technology folks to build out really important internal and external systems to help, with a variety of topics, our CRM, our brand standards, all kinds of things. Just 10 years deeply immersed in the beginnings of e-commerce, and was a pioneer in the mobile payments area particularly. So some of my claims to fame from that era were to build out the infrastructure that keeps your card safe when you tap and pay. Your phone also, using that as a tap and pay device, other form factors like watches and fobs and all kinds of stuff. And then also P2P payments, the first developer program. I worked on the IPO. So I was doing lots of cool strategic things, but decided, what would happen if I go work for a smaller company, and how could that, really be more exciting to me? I was kind of burnt out, had really long commutes, was flying all over the world, had 3 little babies during that 10-year time frame, and wanted to reinvent my life. So what better destination than Los Angeles? So I came out to LA in 2007 to work for a startup. There were, I don't know, maybe like 5 funded companies and 1 VC firm in LA of note. And I worked as the head of product for one of them. It lasted a whole 9 months before the VCs pulled the plug right before the recession. And I learned how to be a consultant really fast. So for the last 15 years, I've worked for agencies or owned an agency. I've been a founder myself, but always about building software companies and their growth trajectory. So mostly product, marketing, strategy work for the last 15 years. I'm at UCLA now getting my executive MBA because it's never too late. So a little plug for hometown school. And a few years ago, I was consulting with a startup and met 2 fantastic guys named Marshall and Tim. And Marshall's on the call today, so you can see his name too. And we realized we had a lot of common interests, and we were all angel investors or doing work for, on variety of scales for equity and for, as consultants. And we realized this was our life's passion. We were really compatible. And we wanted to start a fund. So that's how Steamwork Ventures was born. So I think I caught you up. You okay, Len, or are you frozen?
I'm here.
Okay, great,
I'm here.
great.
So that's a great journey, a great story. And I think the takeaways that I'd like to start with on that, because you've been on the other side of the table. And
Yes.
Being a founder and a startup, and as a woman in the early 2000s doing that, or the mid 2000s doing that, here in Los Angeles, new to town. What was that like, as far as, did you have to raise money, and how did you go about doing that?
So it's such an interesting time. You're right. I mean, I had maybe 3 or 4 friends in Los Angeles, and they were all former colleagues, you know, so I was pretty panicked after the startup shut down, and had to really rely on my very tiny network and their friends to find what I could do next. So I did work for an agency for 2 years, based on referrals, and slowly built my contacts by working in the LA market. And so when it came time to actually start my company, which was the company I started was called Ed Rover, and it was a check-in for charity app, and the founding date was in the spring of 2010. So you can imagine apps were fairly new. People didn't necessarily have smartphones as much as they do now, right? It was a little bit early. And I ended up self-funding with my own personal savings, as well as I did attempt the route of getting angel investment, and I had way more luck getting corporate money, non-dilutive corporate funding. I was awesome at pitching to corporate pitch competitions, and won major awards from AT&T, Microsoft, Computer World, and Classy. And so that was really the way that I continued to fund it. I kept it alive for 4 years. And there are various twists and turns in any founding story, but mine had to do with the IRS, who didn't enjoy the idea of combining a for-profit model and any kind of charitable giving. And unfortunately, I ended up running out of money and having to shut it down, as many founders do. So I feel for you if you're feeling that financial stress. It's never easy.
Sure. And making the decision to shut down a project that you have a lot of passion about,
Sure.
Must have taken a lot of courage.
Well, it's also, the cost, to like admit when it's over and you've put so much time, effort, and your own funds into it is super hard, for sure. But at some point you have to think through, there's so many factors, right? Is this the right direction for my life? Am I putting my family, so your family is your biggest investor. I don't care what shape or form that is in, but they're taking the brunt of whatever's happening, financially when you take on being a founder. And so, really had to think about, what are your obligations to your family? What kind of financial situation would you like to be in? And digging the hole even deeper just didn't make sense at that time. And so I had to make the difficult decision to shut it down.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you were able to do that successfully and then move on to the next thing, right?
It's not easy to move on, believe me. I understand. It's like there's a grieving process, which is something interesting to think about, right? You really do have to give yourself permission to process what happened and to forgive yourself for whatever things you feel like you might have done to contribute to that. And oops, there's some feedback. And really, find what your interests are next, right? And start over again. So luckily I, had lots of contacts by that time and consulting skills, and I was able to pick up and keep going.
Great. So I think that's very astute. And one of the things I tell our founders is, if you're going to fail, fail fast.
Yeah, maybe faster than 4 years.
Maybe faster than 4 years. Yeah, that's letting it go for a little bit of time. So let's transition now as you and Tim and Marshall get together. You know, decided to put together a fund. What was exciting about that for you?
So one of the roles I was playing, yes.
By the way, they're both on the call with us today.
Oh, okay, cool. So I don't have to talk badly about them. I don't see Tim on here, but I'm glad. Oh, it's so nice that Tim joined too. Yeah, you got a triple now. This is amazing. So what was exciting about that for me? So I was running a Preccelerator program, not unlike Preccelerator, called Founders Boost LA. And we would take companies through cohorts in the spring and the fall, and just, you know, it was super exciting. They were getting funding. I was sending these well-prepared companies off to lots of accelerators, and investors and angels were getting excited, and they were all kind of jumping in and getting their piece. And I was not participating financially as much as I wanted to. And so the first thing was just, you know, if I'm going to pour my heart and soul into the startup community, I want to have a way of monetizing that. So that was number one. I mean, already the passion was there, already the care and the good advice was happening. So I just wanted to have a mechanism, a vehicle to do that for myself and also for others, right? There are people in our lives that would love to be a part of that. And so we wanted to make that opportunity available for investors. Having been a solo founder in the past, I was not interested in doing this alone. And although this was on my bucket list for a few years, it wasn't until I think the conversation was with Tim, and I just found the Post-it note the other day, where we decided to, you know, really put this on a Post-it note that we were going to raise $50 million. And I was like, that is a freaking ridiculous number. How did I just write that down? But there's something to that, right? Really making your goals more concrete and finding the resources to accomplish them. You know, if you're really focused on this is what we're going to do, then suddenly the right people show up in your lives, the right, you know, the right resources suddenly appear. And all of that happened sometime last year, middle of last year. Sure. Super exciting.
I want to jump on that note of writing down goals, because I think it's such a powerful technique of being successful.
Yes, and I thought I had it right here, but I don't.
That's okay. But writing down those goals and having it posted where you can see it as you come to that goal, and it really reinforces your whole mindset as you move forward. So that's a great tidbit we're pulling out of this conversation today that I think people can really can use to help their success. So thank you for that. So
can I just add one thing, Len, before we move off that topic? I think it's also important to set your number one goal. Because you could, you know, people tell you, hey, have 12 goals or 21 goals or 22 goals for the new year, whatever. And that can really diffuse your focus. So I think, what's the one goal that if you really applied all of your effort to that, that would make other goals possible? And so I think it's really important to focus on the one.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And it's a great, great bit of wisdom that everybody on the call should be able to take home. So let's move into how did you prepare yourself with Tim and Marshall, and guys, you're on the phone call. You can chime in here, but none of you had run a fund before, is my understanding. So what kind of training did you have to do? What, you know, do you just jump in and say, okay, we're going to raise $15 million and go start asking people for the money? Or
we said 5 0. We're going for it.
Yeah, $50 million.
Yeah.
So you know,
yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. So Tim had recently been through UCLA executive MBA program and had been working on his thesis in private equity and had done a lot of research in this area, and definitely was interested in pursuing a career in venture. I joined that program shortly after we decided to raise a fund. It was part of my bucket list as well. And so I've been doing, sort of graduate level study in that area. But I would say we're getting a lot of value from being a part of accelerators for funds, which you might not know is a thing. And I didn't know was a thing until we started down this path. So we've been through a couple of really interesting ones, and that's been wonderful to grow our network of other emerging managers, as well as limited partners who could potentially be funders of our fund. And so I think really diving into the training they provided, the templates, all kinds of things. And then there's always our resource providers. So we got a big education from interviewing and then finally selecting and working with lawyers, accountants, fund administrators. Oh man, this is a lot more work than anybody could have seen from the outside. And so I really am grateful that we've been able to absorb so much information from these resources. We have a really fantastic team at this point standing behind our three partners that are, we're all ready to get moving in a really fast direction, like very fast.
So let's talk about Steamwork for a second. And, so a $50 million fund is the goal. And you started making investments. Talk about the investment thesis. What are you looking for? How do you evaluate founders? What stage? Some of the, basic tacks of venture.
Well, first I want to make sure everyone on the call understands investment thesis. Like every venture firm or every fund has a particular thesis. They have to zero in on exactly the type of businesses they want to invest in. And so we came up with our thesis together. We realized we wanted to invest in software companies. We saw AI and fintech as being really big trends within that area. And we thought B2B businesses would be really attractive. So we're thinking B2B SaaS, AI, fintech companies. And then we realized we also have a passion to make sure that we're funding companies that are making a difference in the world. We want to fund ideas that we think belong in the world versus kind of, superficial or, one more cut and paste of something that's already been done. We weren't super interested in that. So we added on that we'd like to invest in companies that impact wealth, health, or sustainability. So let me put that all together, right? So Steamwork Ventures is a $50 million fund that is investing in software, AI, and fintech companies that impact wealth, health, or sustainability.
Great, one sentence description of what you do, and founders take note of that, because you should all be able to do that for your companies.
Yes.
Keep it simple, keep it direct. And when you leave here, you will know what Steamwork does because of that one sentence. So great job with that.
Yeah. And then you asked about stage. So we do focus at the mature seed stage, we call it, or some people call it seed plus. So we look for companies with founders that have really know their industries well, and they've been able to get some form of traction. Either they have a really great product already in close to market or in market. They've started to make revenue. They've signed some really big, interesting B2B clients. Perhaps they have a really impressive track record as a founder already or in their industry. So we're looking for those kinds of indicators as well. And then our plan is to invest about $500K in that first check at Seed Plus, and then we've reserved 40% of our fund for follow-on investments. So that means we can, if a company's doing really well, we can continue to maintain the same ownership stake or as close to it as we can into Series A.
Sure. And as you look at companies and founders, especially at the seed stage, and I'm the Preccelerator here is focused on very early pre-seed, pre-revenue.
Yeah.
So the only thing I can bet on is the person. What are some of the attributes you look for in founders that can, reading the tea leaves can give you some indication that they're going to be successful?
Some indication of previous success is always helpful. And that doesn't have to necessarily be in business. Like it could be, hey, they were like amazing athletes, or they were, you know, they had a great trajectory in their career in corporate, something like that is accurate. We are looking for founders that have a really good EQ and IQ, right? So we care that they are going to be the kinds of leaders that will attract a great world-class team and will be able to sell their vision to other investors, to new team members, to clients. So we really are looking for that aptitude, but also the ability to lead with emotional intelligence. And that's a rare combination. So how do we assess emotional intelligence? So sometimes that happens in due diligence or in early calls. If they're pushed on a particular issue, we look for their response, right? We want to see, can they take critique? Can they take suggestions? We're not necessarily the meanest VCs in town, but we're going to use our operational expertise to make suggestions that may not be what the founder was expecting to hear. And how they respond to those questions is really interesting and telling to us. And giving away the formula for that is not super easy, but if there's a lot of pushback, if there's a lot of defensiveness, like those are really warning signs to us. And then we do a lot of due diligence, right? We want to look through contracts. Is everything in alignment? Did you actually get these things signed? Is this just a file that you stuck in your data room? Do you have any weird conflicts going on that we think might cause issues down the road with other investors or with, any kind of legal issues? So we do a pretty deep dive in that, and that usually turns up something. Nobody's perfect, right? There's going to be an issue that comes up in due diligence. And so, yeah, how founders handle those situations is really telling.
Absolutely. And, very similarly, I would say, knowing the three partners of Steamwork, that you all have high EQ, and that's helpful in assessing other people. So you have to trust your instincts, but it's also good to start with that.
Yeah, so, unlike some folks who haven't worked with entrepreneurs a lot, we've worked with, I personally have worked with probably, hundreds, maybe 1,000 entrepreneurs in different settings. And so a pretty good temperature of what is good, what's bad, how are people compared, benchmarked to others. And so I think that's been great. Marshall's been involved with Tech Coast Angels, and Tim's been involved with lots of entrepreneurs through different entrepreneurial programs at UCLA and UCSB, and his own business. Like we've all been entrepreneurs ourselves, and so we've been around the block, and that's kind of rare. Only 27% of venture partners have operational experience. Most of them are finance people, right. So we have maybe a different insight.
Right, and I think that's important as founders look at opportunities of investors, to really pick those investors that match what their needs are. And working for the past 2 years here at the Preccelerator and 13 years prior at Lava, a lot of founders have that desperation that they're going to take any money that is offered to them. And my caution to them is to make sure that there's a good fit, because you want to work with people that are going to be good partners down the road. And when something bad happens, something bad will happen, that you have people that are compassionate and understand and have been through it before to help you through that snag. And I think that's really important and a great attribute for the fund.
Totally, and are aligned with your vision for the product as well. There will be, when I think back to the startup I came to LA to work for, we had pivoted 3 times. It was, it was probably time for the VC to pull the plug, but they will give many firms will give a very hard steer in a direction that the founder is not happy about. That could be, replacing you as a CEO. That's very common. It could be going after a completely different market than you thought you were going after. It could be completely scrapping the thing and starting something new, right? And so there will be these like big resistance moments in your life as a founder, and how that relationship evolves at that moment. Those are the moments of truth, right? And so just knowing that going in, once you take $1 from a VC, you are committing to, really having that rigorous debate and to get this company to be as successful as they expect it to be, right? They're looking for that 10x return from your company, and there will be pressure, right? So you want to make sure that you're going to be, fighting alongside the right people.
Sure, sure. So you've been at this just over a year now. What are some of the bright spots that you can point to, either from a portfolio investment that you've made or a founder that you've met? What are the bright spots that you take away?
Well, so the response to our fund has been phenomenal. We've had almost 600, I think, applications, which is fantastic. We're really excited about that. New ones come in every day, so we're trying to keep up. And we've been in fundraising mode, so it hasn't been easy to keep up. If there are people on the line, and I think there's at least a couple that have applied. I think the early investments that we did in the beginning of this year as proof of concept have been phenomenal. So we invested in 4 companies, and you can dive into them on our website, steamwork.vc, and see the kinds of companies we've invested in. But many of them have been really doing great. I mean, they've been well received by partners and potential clients. They've signed new deals, they've been launching new products, they've been making super headway, they've been getting other investors involved. And so we are pretty confident that as we go to the end of this year and next year, we're going to have some markups, which is fantastic. Oh, thanks, Marshall. Appreciate that. He's always quick with a link. So the companies we've invested in so far are Gift of College, Olven, Adjudicate, and oh my gosh, Telebionics, one of my faves. And so they have been in the fintech space, they've been in the digital health space, and we're also, I think, most excited to find the right fit in the sustainability space.
Excellent, excellent. So you mentioned fundraising for your VC fund, and before the call, we were talking about the similarities that you have to go through in finding the right LPs as founders have to find the right investor. Any learnings in that process that you'd like to share?
It's so true. There are a lot of parallels, and there's so many things I didn't know as a founder that I wish I knew as a founder. Maybe we can share some of that. You really are looking for aligned investors, right? You have to find folks that believe in your thesis as you've stated it. And so finding those types of people who are willing to invest in a fund is actually even harder than it is for a founder to find a VC that's actually, or an angel that's actually kind of public, right? So limited partners and funds tend to hide their family offices, which are like basically the business arm of maybe somebody who sold a business or has had great wealth in the past. And we also look at, as we get larger, we'll look at public pension funds and other institutional investors. So there's a great wide variety of limited partners out there, but you have to find them, develop relationships with them. We've all been on Zoom. It's not easy, right? And so even just getting meetings can be challenging, but we've been pretty successful at that. And we've had really excellent conversations. So we're super excited about how the list of LPs is shaping up. So, but what I wish I knew as a founder about how VCs work, I think that as founders, we think, well, any venture company should be interested in us. We're awesome. We have the best company ever, right? But the problem, or the sort of dilemma that the VC faces, and nobody wants to think that VCs have any dilemmas. They're not sympathetic characters in this show, right? But what I wish founders understood is that we have to make a decision to invest in only 20 or 30 companies in the lifetime of our fund over the course of 2 or 3 years. And that's pretty hard. Sometimes I use an analogy about going to the grocery store and you have a certain limited budget. Let's say you have $50, right? And you have to feed your family for a week. You can only get 20 or 30 items. Like, what do you pick? That's a sort of, just as a practical example that you can really, visualize. That's the dilemma we have, right? So even though we're very founder friendly and we love founders, we love networking with founders, we ultimately have to say no to 99% of the people that we meet, which is hard, right? And so it's no offense to the founders. We hope you have a great company. We hope you do phenomenally well, but it's very difficult to think, what are the ones that are going to be the most compatible with our team, maybe compatible with other companies in our portfolio. And so we really have to think through more issues than I think founders typically think about. And so that's really tough, right? And so I think a lot of folks, and I remember, oh man, how many times have I submitted pitches and never heard back, and all of this stuff that I know you go through. It's really disheartening, right? But finding the right mixture that it's like a chemical reaction, when an investor and a founder really have that right chemistry and you solve each other's problems, you're kind of like the missing piece of the puzzle. That's magic. So I would hold out until you find that feeling.
Excellent. Great points. And even as you go after investors into your fund and LPs, I mean, I'm sure you've been turned down and you have that same feeling. It's like, we're perfect for you. Why don't you invest in us? And we really need and want your money. But at the end of the day, that's not going to happen. So you have to move on. So
as a founder, I didn't really have that thick of a skin. I would kind of take it personally, and at some point the comments shut me down, and I was like, forget it, like, forget you, I'm out of here, I don't need your money, right? And that was maybe not the right attitude. So I think this time around, as raising a fund, the goal is to make great connections and start relationships that may be funding relationships down the road, right? Very few people will meet you for half an hour and then say, yeah, I'm going to write you a check for $1 million. That's a beautiful day when it happens, but it's very rare, right? So you have to give yourself time, patience, and develop that relationship. And also, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. The power balance has to be even and equivalent. Even if you think you don't feel that way, it doesn't make sense that way, but you have something of value to the investor. We have something of value as fund managers to our investors, and you have something of value to your investors, and it has to be equivalent or a transaction won't occur. Very good. And let's see, you can hear me, right? Yes. My internet went off. Oh, I stayed on the phone, and so we're still good. But I guess it just came back on. I'm a little discombobulated here, but your points are all well taken. And as you talk about, fitting with investors and fitting with LPs and fitting with founders, we talked a little bit before the call too on some of the challenges women are having, both as founders and also as partners in VC funds and how they get involved. Let's explore that topic for a little bit, and let's talk about founders. And you're a woman founder, obviously, and do you think at the time that you were putting your company together that your challenge was particularly changed because you're a woman compared to your male counterparts? Or I had been so, this is not meant to be a brag, but I've been so successful in corporate and had not come against that kind of friction. So it was very surprising to me that would even be an issue. It never really occurred to me that it would be an issue at all. And it didn't hit me until being in conversation with a particular angel, which shall remain nameless, that there was any problem at all, right? I didn't know the stats. We didn't have like press releases every day that said, hey, only 2% of funding goes to female founders. I wasn't aware of any of that. I was just, felt like a very competent person who had built a fully functional app that was super awesome. And it was getting traction, and it just didn't occur to me that there would be a barrier. But this particular angel was asking me things like, well, what's an app? Which just seemed like really condescending. We all had fun. He literally had a phone in his desk asking this kind of question. And I'm like, well, it's the little square thing on your phone and you click it and it's software. It does something. And then he would say, well, is this a lifestyle business? Are you just gonna, like basically drive a minivan and, take care of your kids and stuff? I'm like, dude, did you see my resume? But of course he hadn't, right? So like I was receiving his questions in a way that made me defensive, right? And I wasn't ready to, I didn't have that emotional intelligence or understanding of the industry and how this dynamic would work to know what that meant, right? He's just saying, is this going to be $1 billion company, or is this going to be a smaller, like family-owned business, right? And so like over time, I developed that and I understood what those things meant, but he really shut me down. And that conversation was super defensive. And I think even today, it's reported that women founders, female founders, get a different set of questions that are more tailored toward why will this fail versus why will this succeed, right? And so I think the language that that the venture industry uses needs to be more sensitive, and also just there needs to be more awareness that we should have a fair conversation with a simple set of questions that really go to the heart of what matters in an investment, regardless of what the gender is.
Super. Great points. And I think we can leave that topic for now.
Sure.
And because I think you are a great example of a successful woman, a successful person, a successful business person. And gender doesn't have to play into that. Certainly, you just have to be aware that there's those people out there that think differently. And in my world, the way I do that is I try to stay away from those types of folks. Sometimes you don't know they're there until you meet them. But once I do, I just take a step back and move to the next person.
Well, so there's something else going on in this industry right now that I think is kind of dangerous. And that's, if you avoid everybody that might feel that way, you're actually avoiding a huge amount of venture people, right? So even female partners at large firms tend to operate this way. And so if you say, okay, well, the only safe place for me to pitch is, a fund that's just for women. Okay, that's great. But they have, let's say 1% of the capital, right? That's out there, even less. You're going to limit your opportunities. So I guess my recommendation is get comfortable with pitching to people that are outside of your gender, outside of your cultural identity, outside of your comfort zone, and just continue to pitch until you find the right people. And when you find somebody that does rub you the wrong way or gives you weird questions, you don't have to entertain them. You don't have to keep going. But every conversation you have can be a learning experience. What did I learn from that? Should I have explained that differently? Should I have taken a different tact in that conversation? Do I need to develop a response to that for the next time? I think every conversation could also be like, could you recommend me, to one more investor or one more client, or, could you tell me, 3 things you're worried about, even if you're going to say no, is there a way that you could give me some feedback? All of those are opportunities to learn more, craft your pitch, and just keep going.
Super points, and point well taken. I totally agree with everything you just said. It's a numbers game. The more people you talk to, the more successful you're going to be. Don't worry about who you're talking to at first.
Right.
Good practice. Learn from those negative experiences or not so positive experiences. They don't have to be negative, but maybe they're not as positive as you wanted them to be, or it was just a flat no.
Right.
But you can learn from that.
Yeah.
So,
and investors have bad days. Sometimes you just don't click because they're busy and worried and thinking about 12 other things. And just like you have a bad day, right? So you have to realize these are other people, right? You're having a human conversation. So try to spend a couple minutes to just have that human connection in every call. And I think it's going to make you more comfortable as well as them, right? Shows that you actually do care about creating a relationship and not just getting a check.
Yep, absolutely. So what has been like working this new venture of yours through Zoom and versus in-person relationship building. You know, the idea came up prior to COVID, I believe. And,
No, this is a mid-COVID situation.
Mid-COVID decision. So what
mid-COVID thing.
Is there anything from this past 2 years of experience living through COVID that you've learned that you can bring forward as we move out of this COVID world into the post-COVID world, whatever that means?
I mean, Zoom, man, I wish I had been an investor in Zoom. Zoom has been amazing for us, right? And it's amazing for founders. Since, 15 years ago when I moved to LA, the mantra has been, if you want your Series A, you must move to the Bay, right? And I think it's finally cut down some of those barriers, right? We can hop on a Zoom call instead of a plane and have that intro call and see if there's something there before founders would be flying all over, thinking about moving their homes. Like, that's ridiculous. We should be able to build our companies in the place where we live. And I think that's opened up a lot of doors for folks. Investors are more willing to talk to people who live further away from them instead of just, within the mile of their Tesla charge. It could be more than 20, 30, 40, 200 miles from them. And I think that's been a massive opportunity, particularly for founders, women founders, diverse founders who may not have the budget to go and do that, or the time. The family commitments may get in the way, right? So I've been seeing really awesome stories about even pregnant founders getting funding. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how is this happening? There's a lot of good happening from Zoom, but also there's, challenges. You are getting funding from somebody that you've only met on a screen. That's a little bit strange, right? So having that emotional connection is a little harder on Zoom. And I would still recommend, especially as we're opening up now, to go through the preliminary stages of a conversation about funding on Zoom, and then think about whether you have the bandwidth to actually go meet that person in person. That would be my recommendation. It is nice to double check that these are the right people and that you get along in the physical plane as well as on Zoom.
Sure. And, I think what COVID has done for us is it's democratized the ability for people to look for capital, attract capital, invest, where before we were self-limited by the idea that we had to be in person, we had to be close proximity. So geography for Steamwork goes outside the LA, Southern California area. Do you try to invest locally?
So we don't have a geography lens per se. We have made so far half of our investments in the LA area, one in Arizona, so Southwest, and one in the UK, although they plan to move to the States. It's much more about, does our operational experience dovetail nicely with the founder and the company they're forming, because we want to be able to open doors immediately. We want to be able to tap into our network and find them the right people to become clients and partners and help them staff up. And luckily we all three have amazing backgrounds that have been really, really helpful to the founders that we've invested in so far. They've made some great comments, which you can see, I guess, on our LinkedIn. We'd love for you guys to follow us and see our journey. But the founders have really had a great experience with us, and we're super grateful that they've put the time into giving us that feedback and being willing to share that with other founders.
Outstanding. Well, I wanted to leave some time at the end here for some questions, if that's appropriate. So if anybody has questions, I think the best way to do that is if you use the little icon under reactions to raise your hand, and then I can call on you. Or it's a small enough group, if you feel bold enough, just jump in.
I'm not scary.
Does anybody have a question for Tatiana? And Tim and Marshall, you do not get to ask questions here.
They love asking me questions.
So Lamont Gibson, a good friend of mine, asked, what resources are most useful for due diligence on investment of the target
investors? Okay, so we've been talking about different kinds of investors. Are you talking about LPs in the fund? Or are you talking about for a founder that, what's the context for Lamont? He's a founder?
Yes, yes, from a founder
Okay, so
perspective.
he's a founder. You know, one of them that I always like to use is, as it for, you know, recommend to founders is signal.nfx. Maybe somebody can pop that in the chat too, if you know that one, or I can pop that in the chat. What's really cool about that one is that you can look by stage, by you know, by sector, and you can see a lot of information about what investors have invested in similar companies. You can look at their portfolio, you can look at the stage, you can look at their assets under management, you can find their, you know, LinkedIn profiles and websites. You can build a target list of, say, 100, 200, 300 investors that are pretty tightly aligned with your company's mission. And, you know, the other thing that it does that's really cool is it shows you, when you connect your email address to this system, it can pull your contacts and it can say, this person has the strongest relationship to introduce you to that person. So that's a really good resource. There are others, of course. Let's see, I mean, there's Crunchbase, which is, you know, both of those, the basics are free. Signal is actually, NFX is a venture fund, so you can also apply for funding. I think it was pretty brilliant that they put that together. But those are two, I think, really easy to access and free resources. Lots of people post top 10 lists by industry and stage and stuff like that. So there's lots of resources out there. And Greg Bettinelli from Upfront has a really cool list of LA investors. So if you Google that, you should be able to find that.
Excellent. So there's a written comment, and we'll get to Maxine in a second.
Cool.
What go-to-market strategies do you recommend for B2B selling in the healthcare space?
Okay, that might differ by type of product. What kind of product or service is it?
It's a telemedicine.
Telemedicine. And are you selling like as a benefit to employers? Is that it?
Hi Tatiana, I'm just going to jump in here.
Yes, please.
It's a remote patient monitoring solution.
Okay.
So it's trying to sell to hospitals, surgery centers, medical centers, etc. But there is a play to sell to employers as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it does help to have somebody who's got a business development background in those areas, because they come with their own set of contacts. It's a very hard market to tap into. It just so happens that my husband has been involved in selling to hospitals for 30 years. And so we have a little bit of extra insight into what it takes to turn on those relationships. Hospital selling and, you know, surge center selling, it tends to be still very face-to-face. And so that's been an interesting challenge, I think, for folks in this space. They really do like talking about things in person, and that personal touch is still really important in that sector. So, I mean, finding the lists, I actually don't know where the list would come from off the top of my head, but finding those lists and developing those contacts and getting in the door can require a lot of help with appointment setting, and then it's all about relationship building and presenting the business case for why it's important to use the service. Now, with remote patient monitoring, there's some pretty good economics that have been approved in the space, so you should have that already thought through. And if you do, then, you know, it's about getting those appointments and getting out there and meeting.
Great advice.
Thanks for that.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, John. Maxime.
Yes, let me unmute myself. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for putting this together, Lynn, and thank you so much, Tatiana, for every information you share with us. It's super helpful. One of my question is on that advice that you said, you know, when you're talking to investors, it's important to kind of like try to get as much feedback as you can and potentially get some intros. I wanted to know if you have maybe additional information on that. I feel like sometimes it might be a bit challenging to get this from the investor that kind of like
Yes.
already give their time to listen to you, and they don't necessarily, like you mentioned, you're also fundraising, or you may have a bad day or anything like that. And so from that perspective, and the other one, which is it's not necessarily good to get intro to another investors by someone that kind of like passed on your opportunity. Sometimes it makes sense because it's a different stage. But yeah, if you can maybe just elaborate a little bit more on that, that'd be helpful. For context, I'm a founder, so.
For sure. I think the best time to gather advice and ask questions is in a conversation with the investor. If you wait until they've sent you a pass email, they may or may not have the time to reply to you. But if you have had a meeting with them, and I would, have a set of questions that you have going into the meeting in order to guide the meeting. Hey, like, what's your process like? What is your timeline for making investment decisions? The time from the call to making, writing a check, that kind of thing. What's the decision-making like in your firm? How much dry powder do you have? That kind of stuff shows a pretty well informed founder. So having those intro questions, but having those outro questions is also really important. What's the number one risk you see in my business? Let them come up with that on the fly, and then have a response for whatever they say that can actually help you further the sales process during the call. It's very hard to do that after the fact, after they've already, made the commitment to say no. You have to understand that investors' default is no, right? So you have to help overcome all of the risks in order to get it to be a yes. And so, inviting that conversation, I think, is on the call live is really, really impactful and helpful. And who else should I talk to about this? That's another question that would be really helpful to ask live versus, after a pass email. If you meet an investor who seems intrigued by your idea, but it's not in their thesis and they don't want to move forward, it's a little easier to ask for, well, do you know somebody else whose thesis fits? Then you can ask for, hey, would you mind introducing me? And depending on your rapport with the investor, they may, but realize we are, do get lots and lots and lots of applications. We, we have to focus on our jobs, which we are hired by the LPs to do, which is find companies we want to invest in. And so it can be a lot of work to, to make tons of introductions. So just be cognizant of that, right? It is considered gauche, not accepted, to send a company that you've passed on to another investor. Hey, I don't like this one, but you might like it, is not really done. So I don't think that would be the right move. And so asking for that is after a pass email would not be really well received.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah,
and thank you for the question, Kathleen. Appreciate it. So
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
You're welcome.
We're right at the top of the hour, and before we leave, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to pass one important thought after an hour of conversation with you, the thing that you would like us all to remember about Steamwork Venture and yourself, and
Yes.
and being a founder.
Well, for Steamwork Ventures, you can, we do not require intros. So if you're interested in applying, you think you meet our thesis, go to steamwork.vc/connect, and you can fill out our form and you'll be in our database. So as we continue to get funding, we will be able to take a look at your company. And for founders, I would say keep focusing on making a real business that could survive without a VC. And when you do that, VCs will be super interested in your business.
Excellent. Great points. Tatiana, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for inviting me.
I do want to shout out to Marshall and Tim for being here and support. You have a great cast, and being the leading lady in the cast is hard. And you have two leading men with you, and they're great. This is a fun movie to be watching, to use that theme.
Thanks.
I enjoy knowing the three of you. I look forward to working with all of you. And on behalf of the Preccelerator and our portfolio companies and the time that you've all spent with our folks here, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
you out there.
We can't wait to see more Preccelerator companies growing into our stage for investment.
Super. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today.